Hey, welcome to the Ethics Experts. If it's your first time joining us, welcome. And if you're a returning subscriber, hey, bestie, the world is a beautiful place just because you're in it. You see what happens when you subscribe, you get a bonus greeting on every single episode. On this episode, we talked to the one and only Matt Fawcett. He is a general counsel of a really cool, massive multinational company. But the way that he goes about doing his job and building his program, his compliance program and all the other pillars within his legal department is really phenomenal. And I think he presents a lot of really smart frameworks on how we can be more effective and how we can show up as a business person and break this stereotype of a cost center. So hope you enjoy. I know you will. See you.
Welcome to the Ethics Experts, where we're elevating ethics and compliance and HR to the strategic level it's supposed to be.
Hey, Matt, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
Good to see you. Welcome to the Ethics Experts.
Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me, and it's great to be here.
Yeah, I've been excited to get you on. Let me grab my coffee here. You know, I can't do a podcast without coffee. Been excited to get you on. There we go. Cheers. Been excited to get you on, and I just want to kind of dive right in. I always like kind of starting with, how did you get into this space? Because none of us grew up wanting to be compliant, in ethics and compliance stuff like that. So what was your path in?
Yeah, well, originally as a lawyer, right? I'm the general counsel of my company. This is the third time I've been the general counsel of a publicly traded company, but I would say it was really kind of in the middle one, a company called NetApp, where there was a confluence of compliance issues that started coming up, and even things like ESG and you recall the days where those were new ideas. It becomes like, where does this stuff sit? And it can sit in a lot of different places. It just became kind of a natural place for that to kind of gravitate into our organization. And so at my current company, our chief ethics and compliance officer is part of my team. And so we've inherited it. I'm happy that we've inherited it because I think we do a nice job of it. But I also realize it's not always the thing that people want to gravitate towards.
Yeah. So let's go back to coming out of law school. Well, first of all, like, what made you want to be a lawyer? Were you one of those kids who always just wanted to be a lawyer, or what?
No, probably the opposite, Nick. I was one of those kids who didn't know what to do, and enjoyed college tremendously, enjoyed the academic environment, and for lack of a better idea, decided to migrate to law school. So I can't say that was my guiding passion. And in fact, if you look at my career, I moved pretty quickly from private practice to corporate practice. And I think that's probably a reflection of the fact that I hadn't quite thought through what really I was passionate about. But I'm lucky because I landed in an environment that I really love, and I love the job I have now.
Yeah, I mean, we're all doing this for the first time. We're all humans for the first time. So it's hard to know, sometimes you got to try on a couple of shoes before you find the one that actually fits.
Right.
What was it about when you went from private practice into, or you know what I'm saying?
Into corporate practice.
Yeah, into corporate practice. Yeah. What was different about that experience that made you feel like, okay, this is maybe where I want to really build my career?
Yeah, well, there are a few. I usually think in threes, so I'll give you three answers. The first is, in private practice, I was really doing a fair amount of litigation and quasi-litigation work. And I thought that's what, again, my naive person coming out of law school figured that's what you do. Yeah. You go into court, and that's how you build your career. And it wasn't particularly fun. Going into a corporate practice where you're really connected to the business, that's where I learned how to do contracts. That's where I learned how, SEC filings work. That's where I learned all of that and just enjoyed it so much more. The second thing I would say is, I'll never forget when I was getting ready to exit the law firm life. One of the senior this was at the end of the year, and a senior partner has given me a check and said, here's a big check because you worked really hard this year. And I just thought that the value proposition, which is fair, it's what the law firm value proposition is, but like the amount of work is the measure of your kind of success and importance versus the quality of what you get done. And I'm the person who would rather get 100 things done in a day than do like one thing to the A++ level. So it just suits my personality a little better. And then the third, just to get a little snarky, is, the thing that goes around the law firms, like the path to partnership is like, it's a pie eating contest where the reward is more pie. And so if you don't like the pie you're eating as an associate, you're not going to like it anymore as a partner. And so, like I said, I made the move fairly early on in my career, but was really grateful to have awesome experiences along the way.
Yeah, isn't that crazy? I used to work in financial services, and there was a lot of, it was at a big four accounting firm, and I was really so excited to get that job. And I was like, I had my big boy briefcase, and I had my first big boy job, and then like pretty quickly I started to see that like, is this really the life that I want?
Right.
Of just like,
Right.
how many hours did you bill? And like, to your point, like it creates almost a disincentive to like be effective. It creates almost, it's just like, well, shoot, this should just take like this should be a really, really long report, and that means it's good. And it's like, well, no, a better report is maybe 20 pages, not freaking 200 pages,
The model is not very well aligned to the basic interests of the client, right? I mean, let's just see it out loud, and that's too bad, because it does jade you in some ways, or depending on who you are, it can jade you. So I'm much happier in an environment where, my measurement is what did I succeed at, what did I not succeed at, versus how much time did I take irrespective of the outcome.
Yeah, exactly. So you got a lot more variety. Was that corporate practice first job? Was that a public company as well? I think you said there was SEC filings there.
It was 13 U.S. subsidiaries of a Japanese conglomerate, which was a listed company. So the coolness about it, to be honest, was I kind of supported 13 different companies all under one umbrella, but there was hardware and software and services and the burgeoning internet. So it was almost like a throw yourself into the deep end of the pool and just start going. So it was a really wonderful experience.
I was going to say, what are some of the things you learned from that experience? It always seems like, these initial experiences we have when we haven't quote unquote seen it all yet, when we're so impressionable, they really, or like for me at least, like I carry them forward kind of throughout my life, working for a manager that I'm like, okay, don't ever manage somebody that way or whatever, were there any like lessons that you learned in that first chapter that were like really foundational or kind of made you the type of lawyer and the kind of, leader you are today?
It's a good question, and one that I haven't reflected on in a while, but I'll say a couple of things. One is, because these were U.S. subsidiaries of a Japanese conglomerate, there was a high degree of cross-cultural issues that you needed to be sensitive to and think about. And when your internal clients are a mix of both kind of U.S. Western technology types of executives and traditional Japanese leaders and managers, it's just an opportunity to learn. It's like three-dimensional learning, right? So you have to appreciate all that. And that's been very valuable as I've moved on to work. Our company today serves clients in like 80 different countries, and people on my team, and I probably have people on my team in at least 20 different countries. So, having some of that cultural appreciation as you mature in your career makes a difference. The other was, reinforcing that you can't do everything to your level of perfection, right? There's a good enough.
Yeah.
And good enough that keeps things moving is going to be more valuable to your client than I got it perfect, but we missed a deadline, or I got it perfect, but the other side was waiting 5 extra days for something. So I think I learned that kind of blocking and tackling, very quickly, and being able to make that quick, good enough judgment. And I'll tell you right now, I've spent a lot of time as a leader helping younger lawyers in-house help draw that line too, because there is an urge, because of our training, because of our experience, probably because of our DNA, to want to make sure that every comma is in the right place and everything's great. But good enough is the standard we generally go for. Yeah,
that was such a hard lesson for me to learn, because like I'm like a recovering perfectionist. But I mean, at some level, I was talking about this recently, I think on a webinar or something, like expertise in any field is knowing what matters and what doesn't matter. And so like you can spend a disproportionate amount of time making sure all those semicolons are in the right spot. But like if the essence of the message isn't dialed in and it's not going to actually cause the change that's necessary, nobody even knows how to use a semicolon anyways, to your point. So it does, but like starting to really zoom in on, or like get comfortable with like what good enough means, and that good enough is actually like the goal, is a hard thing to kind of calibrate.
Well, that's where, like, I guess the wisdom of experience and judgment come into play, right? Because again, going back to, first year, second year, third year in a law firm, I can tell you there were plenty of times where I was reading a brief for the 15th time at 2 a.m. because like not everything has to be perfect before you submit it. But there's complete diminishing returns, I think, from that kind of approach. And the speed, and look, speed is the currency of business today. I really fundamentally believe that. And so our team needs to be able to help it, if not inject speed, at least don't inject lag. And that's a big part of how I want to approach what we do.
Yeah. I love how you put that, like speed is the currency, and, as you were talking there, I was thinking back to what you said about how, the private practice thing is sort of not necessarily organized to have as direct of an overlap between like success for the client. You said that a lot smarter than I just did. But it's almost like that then breeds this like oversampling of perfectionism, because like what else could be the currency in that kind of an environment, right? Whereas to your point, when you're in, corporate practice, there's 1,000 freaking things you have to be smart on, and there's 1,000 things going on, and you're getting pulled in all these different directions. And it is a different, when you ride a horse for like the first time, you're like, oh, I didn't even know I had a muscle there. It's like, you got to build that kind of a muscle,
Yeah, it might not be intuitive because of the DNA of people who become lawyers, and it's certainly not trained. And you just reminded me of, this is a real thing that happened a couple of years ago. We were exploring building new relationships with a couple of different law firms, right? Wanted to rethink kind of the people who were serving our account. And, all reputable, well-known brand names were sitting down with the team that's making their pitch. And they said, here are the rates that we would apply. And I asked the question, okay, I understand that. And presumably these are the rates for like your A quality work, your A plus quality work. And the answer was, yeah, of course, that's our A plus quality work. And I said, okay, what would the rates be for your C plus quality work? Because we don't always need A plus.
Yeah, exactly.
And you could hear a pin drop, because I'm not even sure sure
they were short circuiting.
Yeah, right. They couldn't conceive of how to answer the question, because it's anathema to the approach. And I'll say that because, when we hire outside counsel, a lot of times it's because we don't have the capability. It's a very serious matter, and we do need A plus, but not everything, right? I even say there are lots of things that are legal that don't need lawyers. And I think we're finding that to be true more and more today. But that approach, it doesn't always have it. Not only does it not always have to be A plus, but it shouldn't, because if it is, you've got a resource allocation problem.
Well, back to your point about injecting lag into, an environment or a system that runs on speed. You know what I mean?
Yep, exactly.
So tell me about the next place you jumped to.
My first job where I became a general counsel, I kind of came in at a lower rung. At the time it was a company called eTech Dynamics. This was at the turn of the century when the fiber optic boom was like the most amazing thing.
Yeah.
And eTech, my first year, got gobbled up by JDS Uniphase, which was it was the behemoth in the space. I think for an entire year, it was the most actively traded company on NASDAQ every day. It was the darling. And we had like a $100 billion valuation, largely built on a premise of a future of an unlimited need for bandwidth. And we were building all the little things that go into fiber optic networks. As meteoric as the rise was, the world changed when suddenly we realized the technology we brought to market has created more capacity in photonic networks than we would likely use over 15 years. And so the tragic fall was long and hard. But along the way, two things happened. One is I kept rising through the organization, and ultimately became the general counsel. That was my first GC job. But the second is the realization that, we all felt like we're so smart when people were, worth gobs of money on paper. Only to realize, we had very little to do with that. But the real challenge and the real learning and the real great experiences that I then took forward into the rest of my career came from how do you work through the hard challenges? How do you manage restructurings? How do you deal with class action lawsuit? How do you deal with all of the noise that comes from a company in distress? And so, on one hand, I wish we didn't have to go through the pain, but on the other, the learning that comes from that is really significant.
Yeah, I'd imagine. My gosh, I didn't realize you worked there. What was that like, that rise and fall? I mean, everyone's got to be walking around like they're 10 feet tall and bulletproof. And, and like, there's this thing in economics called the wealth effect, which is so interesting, where like, if the stock market's doing well and you haven't even, traded in your 401k for a long time, you feel different. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. And then like, when it's down, you feel different as well. So what was that? You kind of touched on it a little bit. Everybody like felt, they were very wealthy on paper. And then you saw this sort of drop, which is also so interesting, right? It's almost like you guys were too good, you built too much capacity or something like that. And it's, it's so crazy. The stock game is crazy.
It's a reckoning, right? I mean, and I try to remind myself in, going forward too, because, we all go through economic cycles and challenges. It's like, you're never as good or as bad as the world kind of thinks you are, right? And so while we were feeling, our chests puffed out and, the number of paper millionaires in the company was kind of staggering. And, this is 25 years ago. So this is, I'm still a young lawyer at this point in time where like wealth managers are cold calling you because they know you work there. And you're like, wow, I must matter. And then the cruel reckoning and the interesting thing for me, and it's an important lesson in that cruel reckoning is, some people gritted it out and really tried to make a difference and help the company, and some people pieced out. And for the people who are a little bit earlier than me, they were able to monetize a little more and a little faster. And, in those challenging times, a lot of people's true colors come out, and it's interesting to see. Yeah.
Yeah. I bet that's, I think that's an interesting word you use, the great reckoning, because it does. I mean, your character is revealed in the fire. It's revealed in the firefight. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. And so, like I said, I mean, I guess I have a weird kind of gratitude for having to live through that pain. And also, to be at a company, it's not always that a company will promote their next GC from within.
Yeah, right.
And especially in a distressed situation, that's not always common either. So I have a lot of gratitude and appreciation for the team that let me take that responsibility on and really start doing the thing that I love to do.
Yeah, they gave you, they kind of made a bet on you before you were proven, which, and you seem like a guy that has a lot of humility. But what do you think you did during that reckoning that put yourself in a position to be that heir apparent, to be able to have that kind of an opportunity, which to your point is like very rare,
Yeah, this is what I tell people on my team, or I tell other lawyers too. Yeah, I think humility is a really important way that you show up to do the work. I think building trusted relationships with your internal clients is key. I mean, I think if they know that you're on their side and you're trying to accomplish the same thing, you can work through hard things. But if they feel like you're always going to be the person who's looking over their shoulder and telling them they're doing something wrong, that's never going to work. But the important piece is, I think I was the word I'm looking for, vocal is maybe not exactly the right word, but I did state my intention and my ambition to want to build a portfolio of experiences that would let me be a general counsel. So it's not like one day I woke up and the board said congratulations. It's over the course of several years. I just took on different roles inside the company. So I took on the commercial team for a while. I then got lucky and got to run the IP team, and I got to run the securities team. So, I guess that the point there is lateral moves are not a bad thing if they're in service of doing something beyond. And so I know a lot of people who aspire to be GCs want to do the very best job in the function, right? The function that they have. And usually if you're a functional leader in a legal department, it's one piece. It's not the whole portfolio.
Right.
But finding ways to get those broader experiences is really important to me.
Yeah. And you can kind of build a reputation. You can build a brand inside the company along the way,
For sure.
I find, something you said there is so smart. I've just found, like, in my own career, if I don't have that next move lined up, it's hard to, like, organize what I'm doing right now. But when I do have that next move lined up, or not lined up in that, like, it's a foregone conclusion, but just something I'm running at, it makes it provides that, like, context. It provides that North Star that, like, it provides a problem to solve for, and it makes it a little bit easier to, like, be more gritty in the hard times because it's, again, in pursuit of this other thing. Have you always been that way, like, thinking about that next move, or was that did that goal of being a GC just sort of kind of start to bubble up as you were in corporate practice?
No, I think, yeah. So I'll answer the question a couple of ways, and hopefully not to sound arrogant at all. But when I made my first move in-house, I've always been a person, maybe it's through ego or whatever, but I've always aspired to have leadership roles, and I'm like a hyper competitive person. So in the domain of a law department, the ultimate leader is usually the general counsel. So that's kind of always been a way that I'm naturally wired. But with that said, at the last place that I was, and coming into DXC now, where I've been just a little over a year, it's less for me right now. My role is less about what's the next thing I'm going to do, but it's more articulated as, how do I build a department where I'm irrelevant? And what I mean by that is, my aspiration for the company I'm with now is to build a world-class legal team that, should I hit the lottery or get hit by a bus or whatever, does not need me to be there to keep it running. And so, to your question, I do have an aspiration, but it's not expressed as, here's the next company I want to work for. It's, here's what I think my job is. And I literally said that phrase to my CEO this morning because we were having a conversation about org. I mean, my goal, my aspiration is to make myself irrelevant. And if I've done that, then I think I've served the company and the company's shareholders well. I think what you just said there is an important distinction, because that next step doesn't necessarily have to be a different job at a different company. It just needs to be something beyond where you're at right now, or whatever circumstance you're into. Again, just kind of acclimate current efforts in pursuit of that thing, Yeah, it's that. Yeah, you just articulated it in a way that now reminds me of one of the challenges I think I observe with different people, different teams. It's, if it's like, we're just keeping the lights on, that's not very exciting to me, right?
Yeah, right. You're a builder. Yeah.
I hope I aspire to be.
So what was, I know you got to work in a bunch of different sort of pillars of the legal temple before you got that first GC role. When you assumed that role, where were you at in the turnaround or the distressed sort of timeline? And what was surprising about, holding those reins that you had been kind of putting yourself in a position to hold for, presumably a couple of years?
So that first GC opportunity, the company we were simultaneously buying companies and selling companies as we were trying to reorganize a portfolio to build for the future. And And so I would say we were kind of maybe halfway through that at the time I took the reins. And after I left, through the good work of a lot of people there, JDSU actually split into two publicly traded companies. And both of those companies are alive and well. And I've got friends at both of them. And so I'm really, really pleased to see how that worked out. The transition for me, in many ways, was probably easier than my next transition or my transition after that, because I had already built relationship, not only with my colleagues, the people who I was now leading, but also within the company more broadly. And I can tell you, going from that world to a world where, frankly, you're an outside GC being hired in when the current GC is being, is either leaving or being replaced, and you're inheriting a team that has no idea who you are.
Yeah.
Is a very different experience, and that's been an interesting one, especially at my new place, because the company is so vast, geographically remote. Almost everybody works virtually, so it's the first time I joined a company where we work virtually, and it took me an entire year before I even got to meet face to face with some people who are direct reports. I mean,
Crazy.
forget about the rest of the organization. I mean, there are people all over the world on my team who I have not yet met face to face yet, and I definitely feel that absence.
Yeah, I mean, what a different game that is. Assuming that role inside a company where you have all these relationships and you've already sort of worn all these paths through the forest, versus stepping into one that is, where you don't have that reputation, you don't have those relationships built. And then now in this one where all the interactions are through a screen. I mean, you've said the word relationship multiple times here. And I happen to think that is really the kind of lifeblood of being effective, especially in like one of these guardian positions, whether it's legal or it's ethics or it's HR. Like these guardian positions are often, what you described is kind of the stereotype of kind of being apart from the business instead of a part of the business, that, people want to keep you at arm's length because they don't want to get in trouble. They don't want you looking over their shoulder, all those kinds of things. And it seems like the only antidote is like relationship.
Big time. So I use the distinction of role authority versus relationship authority a lot. I use it when I talk to my team about it too. And what I mean by that is, as the GC, I know that if I call anybody in the company up and say, I need to talk to you, I'm going to get through, right? There's not a person who I cannot reach if I need to. But if it's like, I need you to call me because I'm the GC, I think we're already at a net debit, right? That's going to feel like Fawcett's calling me because he's going to reprimand me for something. But in relationship authority, if we've built, at least a level of trust and a mutual understanding that we're trying to solve a problem together, it shouldn't matter whether I'm the GC or I'm like just a new person in the legal team. And that's what I aspire to. I think that is harder in a company of 125,000 people in 80 countries working through screens all the time. Like where do you find time to do it? But I do make a conscious effort to try to build relationship authority, and I want to never have to say I'm the general counsel, so this is what's going to happen. I just think that's not a good thing.
I used to be in private equity, and we had an interim CEO, and he was like a guy that I learned a lot from in terms of like what to not do. And I remember we were in this meeting, and it was out of a cartoon, man. I mean, he was like, I'm the CEO. And I was just like, the rich man doesn't have to say he's rich. Right. The CEO should not have to be pounding people over the head to get him to do what he wants to do and remind them of the thing that everybody already knows that. Everybody in the room already knows that. I mean, it's so crazy. And it just, I remember I was like, I don't know, I was like 28 or something. And I remember sitting in this room being like, the most powerful person in the room just did like the weakest thing and destroyed so much equity, it sucked the energy out of the room. It was crazy.
Totally. That's a great example. And that's right. That's what I want to avoid. And I think it's, to your point, like people who are in, guardian types of positions, I think we almost start with that assumption being put on you, right?
Agree.
There's
Yes.
the GC, there's the CFO. He's going to tell me I'm spending too much money. There's the CHRO. That person's going to tell me that I'm violating some code of conduct rule, and it's hard to run a business, let alone a complex multinational business, if you start with that kind of negative assumption about everybody's intentions.
But it's also such an opportunity if you think about it, because like these relationships are based on impressions, it's based on trust, and it's based on people's like lived experience, right? Like if they just worked for a GC that was very hit you over the head, they're going to bring that stereotype to the interaction, right? And one of the most valuable or effective, I don't know what to call it, things. Okay, how's that? One of the most valuable and effective things in like influencing somebody is like breaking the pattern. Like if you think something's, I mean, that's what all jokes are, right? Jokes, you think it's going here and then it goes left. And like we as human beings are like pattern recognition machines. That's why you can look at a picture and just be like, yeah, that's just a bunch of grass. And then you see some movement and you're like, oh, there's a leopard in the grass. Cause like that pattern change, you know what I mean? So there's so much opportunity in like changing the brand or changing the interaction, changing the brand of the department, changing the personal brand and building those relationships and really kind of shortcutting to that relational authority, which, I agree is like, that's the true authority. It's not the positional authority. Like, I've said this before, but when I became CEO of this company, I thought like, great, now people are going to listen. It's like, nobody listens. Okay.
Right.
People do what they want to do. Okay. Why do you think we in these guardian positions, whether it's legal or compliance or HR or whatever, why do we not sort of take advantage of that pattern interrupt opportunity that we have to really kind of juice the relational authority or the relational equity, which ultimately, in my experience at least, like drives actual effectiveness?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I guess if I really knew the answer, I don't know what I would completely do with that. But I think there's a big element in the tone that gets set by a leadership team, and if that tone is, hey, the lawyer over there, or hey, the finance person over there, as opposed to hey, my teammate over there, or hey, my colleague over there, and so that's part one. I think part two, in defense of my colleagues and my colleagues in finance and HR, I mean, it's not infrequently that we are dealing with challenges, and we have to bring some painful medicine to an organization or a team or a person. And so I think there's always going to be some of that push pull, but the relational authority, and sometimes you even have to say it out loud. Like we're in a room, like, remember, we're on the same team. Remember, we want the same thing. I mean, just to like give that expression voice so people can remember this isn't oppositional, even when it feels like there's friction. And sometimes there has to be.
Yeah, to your point, I mean, it's on us to reframe that relationship, because guardians by their nature are sometimes, guardians need a weapon, right? Like you have to have some teeth if you're going to be, fending off marauders or whatever that might be. Do you feel like you seem like somebody who's always been kind of wired this way? Do you feel like this lesson was just like taught to you in the way that you came up, and like you saw the value of it and you saw like, man, this is really how things get done? And maybe it was, again, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but like maybe it was like the importance of those relationships were perhaps underscored in the new position where you sort of stepped into that GC role and you're like, okay, this is really like my first order of business. Because I always tell people that if you're coming into a new role, your first thing to do is to build trust. Like when I came in, when me and my brother came into this company, we wanted to like roll our sleeves up and start, knocking down walls and like making changes. And I got advice from somebody, one of our mentors and investors. He was like, you're going to want to go in there and start swinging the axe. And he's like, don't do anything for 6 months. And it was like the best advice we ever got. Like, I still see the benefits from that trust we were able to build with like the team that was here. And I don't think that was my initial instinct, even though I'm kind of wired that way. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, you just shared a story that is almost like a carbon copy of a conversation I had when I first joined NetApp. NetApp's the company I joined as the general counsel right after JDS Uniphase. And the CEO said effectively, Matt, you're going to come in here and you've come in with a lot of great experience, and you're going to see our company through the lens of all that experience. And all that experience is going to make you look at things and say, this looks dumb. This looks stupid. Why do we do this? And you're going to have this urge to go, knock it all down or change it all up. He said, but before you do that, try to put on the lens of this company, right? And assume that things exist for a reason. Maybe that reason is beyond. Maybe that reason doesn't work anymore. But look at it through the lens of this company, not through the lens of the old company. So I got, and that was meaningful advice. I mean, that was in 2010, 15 years ago. I still repeat that. I mean, literally not a year goes by where I'm not having that conversation as a reminder. And to your question, what's natural and native versus what's learned? I'm in my office here in Naples, Florida. My bookshelves here are loaded with management and leadership and related types of books because I never learned. I was never taught how to do it. And right. The wealth of real good thinking from hundreds of years ago to literally, blogs that get written today. There's so much out there that stimulates my brain and helps me articulate how I want to show up and how I want to lead. So I think there needs to be a native predilection for that, but I've been a huge consumer of information too, and I've found it to be quite influential.
Man, I love everything you said right there. I read this book. It's one of my favorite books. What's it called? Psycho-Cybernetics. Have you heard of this book?
I don't think so.
It's so good. It's probably one of my top 5 books. If I got the title wrong, sorry, but it's Psycho-Cybernetics. Okay, and so the premise of the book is I'd highly recommend it. But the premise of the book is that we all have your brain is not you. Your mind isn't even you. You have a mind, you have a brain, and that's a tool just like your body. And it's a natural goal seek mechanism. And so, if you think about what, a good example of a goal seek mechanism is like a heat seeking, torpedo, where right. The way that runs is it shoots this way and then there's heat over there. So it changes direction and then there's heat over here. And it's just sort of going back and forth until it zeroes in on the thing. And we have that thing in our mind. That's why sometimes you'll be in the shower and you come up with a great idea, or you wake up in the morning, you're like, oh my gosh, here's the answer. That's because that goal seek mechanism that is your subconscious mind is working on the problem. And so, you probably don't need more help on reading legal briefs or whatever, right. Whatever lawyers do, or how to get better at contracts. You've already sort of experienced that. And what I found is that the more just other stuff I'm exposing myself to, the more of these, great writings in leadership or persuasion or influence or all these things, they all just kind of go into the brain, and you kind of start to see the world in a bit of a different way, and you start to see opportunities to just naturally start to implement those things versus, the more sort of artificial, synthetic, imposition of some kind of framework that you learned. It's if you're feeding the brain, it's just naturally going to come out.
Yeah. So I totally agree. And the analogy that I've used that you just reminded me of is if you take in your brain and you just imagine looking straight down at the top of a diamond, right? You see one facet, you see that surface. But then if you start picking it up and turning it around, you're seeing all these other facets, you're seeing all this other light, when you change the angle at which you approach something. And that's cognitively why a lot of great ideas happen in the shower, because right. You're not looking at the surface of the diamond, whatever that problem is. You might be drifting mentally and you see a facet of it, doing yes. something differently. And I find that to be true for me all the time. And so the stimulation of different ideas from different people will often, or, watching a great movie or reading a book, then you're like, oh my God, now I just remember, now I know the solution to this problem over here. I find that happens quite often.
Yeah, it's so freaking interesting. I love that diamond example. I mean, you can just carry that analogy forward into so many different things, which makes it so important to like continue to feed and continue to carve out time for that other stuff. Because I mean, I just find that I can like overly fixate on just that single facet, and I'm like, this is just a circle or something. And it's like, no, it's a diamond, and there's multiple facets, and it's a 3D shape. And I really love that analogy. Have you seen this, whether it's with your department, the departments that you've been a part of, the ones that you've been over, or even like sub-departments within it, where folks struggle, particularly in these guardian positions, they struggle to like show their value to the business. And many times these positions are viewed by leadership or by the board, whatever, other sort of counterparts as like have to haves, not things that are really like supercharging the business. From my vantage point, when these guardian roles like legal, like compliance, whatever, are actually, doing their job, they're adding a ton to the bottom line, but it's not like a direct thing. Like when sales is kicking ass, you see that in the quarterly results, that's hitting the top of the P&L. When legal is doing a great job, it's kind of affecting a bunch of things on the P&L. So like, have you seen this dynamic in like how have you approached it, or what advice would you give to somebody who feels like, man, the work I'm doing is like really important, but like I'm not getting the recognition, thus I'm not getting the endorsement, thus I'm not getting the resources I need to really like take this thing to the next level?
Yeah, it's I literally wrestle with that constantly, right? With my experience, I know the value we provide. How do I express it in a way that translates to the business? So I'll offer a couple of thoughts there. One is, I think it's really important for the legal team to be highly transparent about where it's allocating resources and what its cost targets are. Where do we perform to budget, or where do we blow our budget? And the reason why is, I've sat through so many quarterly business reviews and monthly business reviews, and every other function starts with like, here's the P&L, right? Legal teams generally don't say, here's our P&L. So you're almost like starting off by saying, I talk a different language, you need to understand my language.
Right.
I try to flip that. So I say, here's my P&L too. And you can judge me by the same numbers that you're going to judge the sales team, that you're going to judge the product team, that you're going to judge the finance team. I think that, as uncomfortable as that can be, I think you got to be transparent and clear about that, because it's showing that you're integrated with the business and you're aligning to the same important things that the business is aligning to.
Yeah, you're starting out speaking their language, to your point.
Right. And I think that's a credibility maker, even when you're not on target, right? Even when you're not on target, at least you're being clear about, we're not on target. So that's part one. The other part, which also feels so simple, but I find legal teams really struggle with, is, a company will have 3 or 4 strategic priorities for the year, right? And those strategic priorities are often expressed in sales growth, new product releases, different kinds of efficiency gains. And I say, we're going to align our department behind these goals, even if it's not completely intuitive today on how we're going to help grow sales. We got to figure out how to grow sales. Even if it's not intuitive today, how we're going to help the operations go faster, that's what we have to do. And I challenge us to say, if the work we're doing on a day-to-day basis is not aligned with the company's strategic priorities, then we have to ask ourselves, how important is that work?
Yeah, right.
But it's also really easy to fall in the trap of, there's a mountain of stuff. And that's the third point, because you talk about resources. When general counsels meet each other, I can predict with better than 90% accuracy what the first question is. You probably can too. The first question when 2 GCs meet each other is, how big is your legal team?
Yep.
Right. I get that question all the time. And I point that out because that is a proxy in the minds of other GCs, like how important are you? You know, do you have a huge team or do you have a tiny team? And that somehow reveals something about your scope of your role. And I think that is the opposite way you should be thinking about it. I think that is completely upside down. And, you know, I am really proud to say that the legal team that I left at my last company was half the size of the one I inherited because we just learned how to do things differently and more efficiently and better. And so I've also never met an in-house lawyer who hasn't said they're under-resourced and overworked. I mean, that's coin of the realm. So the trick to me is not how do I get more of something. I always say I hate people saying I need to do more with less. I hate that phrase. I want to say, how do you do less? How can you do less, right?
And get more. Yeah.
And get more. Let's focus on what really matters, and don't just say, you know, now I need to work 50 hours a week or 60 hours a week. It's like, how do we maintain our lives knowing that there will always be pressure to be efficient? So I would like to say that the company, when I leave the company I'm with today, it's the legal team will be better, more efficient, faster, cheaper, and smaller. Not because I'm trying to get rid of people. I mean, just natural evolution. But that's my aspiration. My aspiration is not to have a team that's twice as big. It's to have a team that's half as big, but doing more.
Yeah, I love what you said there. And you know, two interesting things, or the two things I find interesting is, I have like three things I want to say. It's almost like a recurrence of that private practice thing, where like success is denominated in the extent of perfection and how much you've worked versus like true effectiveness. So that's one interesting thing, that it's like, hey, we're going to be kind of, comparing who's better based on this thing that is not really indicative of what a successful or effective program is. That's one. But I also find I believe that like this cost center, profit center thing, this like false dichotomy that seems to exist in the business world. It's weird how those who are deemed cost centers reinforce that in a way. You know, it's like, well, I believe I'm a cost center, so thus what else can I denominate like success by other than, kind of things that are not necessarily connected to, what the business cares about, which is maybe bottom line expansion or something, right? And when you were talking about like your three strategies on how to avoid kind of falling into that trap, I just found it very interesting that those were all framing exercises. I'm going to show a P&L. I'm going to talk about, I'm going to connect to the business strategy. What you're talking about is you're showing up as like a business person, just like your other counterparts that are leading with those P&Ls. And it's interesting how both easy and hard it is, easy to break that frame because it's just saying words a little bit different. It's just looking at that diamond from a bit of a different perspective. But it's so easy also to get kind of caught in that language of a cost center, and like cost centers in the eye of a beholder, of the beholder. Like if the CEO thinks legal is not a cost center because legal is like doing so well and the person over it is, he has the certainty that the leader of that department, quote unquote, gets it. Well, then that person has already sort of shifted out of that cost center bucket, and now they're at the big kids table. So It's like you just have to pull your chair up to like the adults table to get out of that. But like so many of us, we're not willing to do it, or we don't see that like these chairs have rollers and we can just roll over to the other table and just kind of start talking like an adult. You know what I mean? There is
it's clinically true that we generally prefer to be in a comfortable zone than in an uncomfortable zone. But there's not a whole lot of learning that happens in a comfortable zone. Learning happens when you get to the discomfort. So no, I think that's well said, and I agree.
So you've talked about, traditional legal departments are really backward looking. And you've talked about the value in being, a modern legal, department that's forward looking and creative. What does this shift look like if someone feels like they're in this sort of backward looking thing?
Yeah, I mean, look, I do think for the most part we tend to be backward looking, and I think that's for a lot of reasons. That's our training, our education, our experience, because by and large, we tend to look to precedent and we tend to
Yeah.
look to rules to help inform and establish how we make decisions going forward. But I do think today that approach is only marginally informative. And I think that's true because both the pace and rate of change is so significant. I mean, just in the last 5 years, companies had to deal with COVID, then remote work, now return to office. We've never confronted that before, right?
Right.
We're confronted with changing landscapes and geopolitical tensions that put multinationals in a real bind when it thinks
Yeah.
about how do you comply with U.S. executive orders versus what European customers and public sector customers not only expect but contractually demand, right? And how do you navigate that? And I don't think we've ever had to do that before, like deal with that kind of schizophrenia. And I also think, I mean, here's another example just on how much change has happened. I mean, you can look at the graphs on the more data will be created this year than in the history of the world, right? I mean,
Wow.
the pace of data creation is really, really significant, and that creates all sorts of challenges and opportunities. But even something like, legal ops, legal operations. Lawyers have been around forever. Law departments have been around forever. 10 years ago, only like less than 20% of law departments even had a legal operations person or function, just 10 years ago. Now it's like 70% of
Wow.
law departments have a legal ops person. It's like one of the most popular job profiles on LinkedIn today. And I mean, that just shows like what I would call like a seismic shift in the priority and scope of what a law department is supposed to do. And you can't look at precedent to figure out how to deal with all those things, right? So to me, that's like the thing I say is like the recipes for the future are not in the cookbooks of the past, right? We're going to have to write some of our own recipes. So what does that look like? I mean, to me, it's some simple stuff like asking the why questions, right? Not assuming, hey, this is how we've done it. It's like, why did we do it that way? Is that still relevant? What if we did it a different way? Or like the big question that I'm asking literally almost every day, what if we don't do this at all anymore? What would happen? And I think the forward-looking legal departments are saying, even from super successful companies, they're going to say, what we did before is not going to carry us forward. So let's really examine some of those fundamental things.
Yeah, it's like you need to have a flexibility that I love how you put that, both the ability to ask why and then also to ask like what if.
What if? Yeah. I mean, fundamental stuff.
Yeah, I love it. So, man, this was really great. Really an inspirational conversation. I appreciate you hopping on. This was really a lot of fun.
Well, it's my pleasure. I had a great time. Your background is so much better than mine.
Well, thank you. Well, I'm not in Naples though, so I got to do something.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. We'll see you next time.
Take care.